I'm Anya Schiffrin, and I'm the Director of the Technology, Media, and Communications Specialization at the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. I am delighted to be moderating this panel, and I would like to thank the SIPA Alumni Office, the SIPA Communications team, including Nadine Tamamli and Rachel Zala, for putting this together with our TMAC program assistant, Alan McInerney. Dean Jano has put together a whole series of post-election events, and TMAC put together a bunch of events before the election. And in 2016, we had some of our student activists come back and talk to us about their experiences on the Hillary Clinton campaign. And I was really excited to this time organize another panel of alumni, students, and Mayor Nutter, who is always a voice of great intelligence, sanity, insider knowledge. What happened? Andres Chong-Qui Torres founded Civic at SIPA because he realized that SIPA didn't actually have a sort of student political campaigning group. And the very first event that we did together was when we brought AOC to campus. Michelle Meza introduced me to Andres, and that was our first event with the Columbia undergrad Democrats as well. It was an unbelievable night. All of us who were there will never forget how crowded it was and getting kicked off campus at the last minute by the administration. So that was how we all got to know each other, and we've been in touch ever since. So I will introduce the panelists and read you one beautiful quote. I've been reading a book about activism at Columbia in the 1960s. So I'll just read a quote from that, and then we'll get started, and I'll stand back. So Michelle Meza graduated from SIPA last year and has been working on the Biden campaign, phone banking, and organizing voters in Wisconsin. Andres Chong-Qui Torres, who founded Civic when he was at SIPA, has been working in Florida. Jasneet Hora, another alum, used to be many years ago, I remember, a speechwriter, I think, with Kamala Harris, and this time around worked on the Warren campaign and then the Biden campaign. And I asked Zachey, who's a first year, who's been in North Carolina, to kindly moderate. The book that I've been reading about activism at Columbia is called A Time to Stir. I won't show it up because I think it'll look reversed probably towards you. I didn't do the mirror. And it's first person essays about the week in 1968 when students took over 5 buildings on the campus of Columbia to protest a planned gymnasium in a nearby Harlem park. And of course, the 68 protests at Columbia are really, unforgettable. And everybody, there's still lots of people involved, and we have lots of events about them. But there was one paragraph that I was reading this morning, which reminded me so much of our active students. People speak of Columbia as a transforming event, a unique time when we bonded intensely with each other, some of us total strangers. We placed our lives and futures in each other's hands. We ate, slept, breathed, and loved our political activism. And to me, that really sums up the best of what I've seen over the years among our engaged students, that incredible passion and commitment. And I think no one has done more to nurture that, to foster that, than Mayor Nutter, who has brought to bear his incredible political experience in the United States and his decades of organizing and political activism to really nurture and transmit to the next generation. So I am honored to have this panel here, and I will now mute and let our moderator, Zachey Kilgar, take over. Thank you all for coming, and to the audience as well.
Anya, thank you for the kind comments. I did not write those, so thank you very, very much. I was surprised you said that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Hey, Michelle.
Thanks very much, Anya. I'm also thrilled to be here and looking forward to our discussion today. So I thought to start, we could have each panelist describe the work you were doing for the Biden campaign, and maybe one big takeaway that you each have, either from your work on the campaign or even just the past week since the election has ended. And Andres, if you want to kick us off, feel free.
Thank you, Zachey. And first and foremost, thank you for Professor Schiffrin for this opportunity, and Mayor Nutter, who has not only been my professor, but a mentor to me. And I took his classes, I TA'd for him, and Anya Schiffrin couldn't be more correct about Mayor Nutter and his impact in all of us. And I want to start by describing, what Civic is. It's a SIPA Civic and Voter Engagement Coalition. And it's not just about political campaigns, it's about issues. It's about things that people care about. Mayor Nutter asked us the question in 2017 when I arrived, like, why do we vote on Tuesdays, right? Like, why is it that it's so hard for people to get to vote? And so we started tackling these questions in the classroom. And then we said, how can we apply this knowledge into the ground? So let's bring to SIPA an organization that can help us put everything we learn in the classroom into practice. So long story short, fast forwarding to 2020, we prepared very hard. We built a network, an organization, a grassroots work with the student body. And we got folks excited about the 2018 election, and then we worked towards the 2020 election. In my particular case, I worked as well, like Jasneet, for the Warren primaries in Iowa, in New Hampshire, knocking on doors in the freezing cold. And it was an incredible experience. And once Joe Biden got selected as a nominee, we all, like, very quickly, with Senator Warren's blessing, jumped onto the Biden campaign. In my particular case, I had the luck to have known Josh Dixon from my time in the Obama administration. He became the national director of faith engagement, and he asked me to jump in as one of his co-founders of Believers for Biden and Creyentes con Biden, which means believers in Spanish. And we were able to start a huge movement on Facebook, social media, to get all those people of faith, which is such an important chunk of our electorate, excited about voting for Joe Biden. And why is it that their moral values align with Joe Biden and not with Donald Trump's? That's on one end. And on the other end, we collaborated with the organizers from Florida, from Osceola County and Orange County, which I'm later going to give you all this important data about how amazing a group of folks that joined from the Warren campaign all the way up to the Biden campaign built incredible momentum. And we were able to make more than 60,000 calls into that region of Florida, which is mostly Puerto Rican. And we delivered for that region. The Biden campaign won, and I'll give you the data in a few seconds. But I'll just start with that, and I'll let other folks introduce themselves.
I can go next. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be with you. Not gonna lie, I kind of miss the smell of Strokos that would usually be here if it was a SIPA panel, but perhaps in the future. So I was involved with the 2020 campaign these last few months with President Biden's campaign in two different ways. The speechwriting firm that I work for, called West Wing Writers, hosted the writers' room of the Democratic Convention. So as I'm sure we watched, it was a very unconventional convention, completely virtual. And that brought a series of different challenges. When we think of different conventions in the past, whether that's 2004, we remember great lines from speeches. We remember, there is no red United States, there are no blue states, there are only the United States of America. Or when we think of 2016, we think of when they go low, we go high. Because we knew that speeches themselves, you're not going to have, you're not going to have the same impact. We really wanted to show some of the diversity and some of the beauty of America with this convention. And so if we take a second to think about what we remember from the convention, for a lot of people, it's the roll call, whether that was, learning about the meat packers in Nebraska or the calamari in Rhode Island. And that was sort of my first taste of virtual engagement for this cycle. And that really continued with the volunteer work that I did for the Biden campaign over the past few weeks. We led a team of 70 volunteers to get out the vote in critical states over these last 2 weeks. And a big takeaway from that is that I don't think virtual canvassing, virtual campaigning, even once the pandemic is over, is going anywhere. There are so many different people that got involved with this process. Of the 70 volunteers on my team, the majority were seniors and folks that had wanted to get involved with the election, but that just had, either out of safety concerns or just mobility, no way to get involved in the capacity that they wanted. And the infrastructure of phone banking, text banking, voter protection hotline work, all of that came together to create just a wonderful opportunity for them to get involved. And those are people that will continue to be activated post this election. We'll get into, I think, what the next 2 months will look like, but I suspect we might need to marshal those forces again, especially for the runoff in Georgia and for any pressure we want to create to the Republican senators who are still going along with the president's charade. But I'm sure we'll get into that.
Well, let me continue. In my case, it was a little bit different because just as Andres was mentioning some minutes ago, I was part of that group of former Warren staffers and supporters who decided to join and volunteer, making phone calls early in July or June for Biden in Florida, in the Osceola County. But in my case, because of the COVID outbreak in New York, I was in Peru. So basically, I was borrowing my mom's phone that had international, roaming to just make these calls to Florida voters in the States. So basically, my work started from abroad in Peru, but I was just so anxious and, as every day passed, so nervous about this election and the fact that Donald Trump had really real chances of winning re-election. And I think this maybe we should underscore this more because it is very hard to unseat a sitting president. And I decided to just start making calls as a volunteer, from Peru in Florida. And then I remembered I decided, okay, I want to get engaged in this Biden movement, in this Biden coalition from a professional role. So I started having, virtual coffee chats with a lot of people saying, how can I do to get engaged and be in the front lines of this virtual movement? And I remember one person I met through LinkedIn, she was in the voter protection team in the Texas Democratic Party. She said, Michelle, you will never do this if you don't come to the States, because of election integrity issues, it is impossible for you to just, work from a professional role abroad. So I decided to travel back to the States and just search for this opportunity where I could just join the campaign professionally and put all these skills and experience of other organizing campaigns I had into this campaign, because I knew, and just as everybody here, the major stakes that were at play. And I would just finish this first part by reflecting on this CNN host, Van Jones, that I saw in TV just breaking out in tears, because certainly his words were just so full of truth, right? This day, the day that the election was called out, it was easier to be a parent. It was easier to be a dad. It was easier to tell your kid, character matters. It matters. Being a good person matters, and decency matters. And I think that this election was not about different policy menus for different tasting audiences. This election came down to decency, unity, integrity, and respect for diversity. And I think that, all these efforts pulled together finally saved us a day and make democracy live another day. So I'll just finish there and pass it over.
Thanks, Michelle. Mayor Nutter, I want to give you a chance to chime in. Any big takeaways from your end, and what have you made of the campaign and the last week since the election has ended?
Well, a couple things. First, Professor Schiffrin, thank you so very much for making this happen. I so appreciate you, and I mean, you're just a fantastic colleague. I mean, you call on me for any number of things, and I always look forward to being involved in whatever you're doing. So it's kind of like Professor Schiffrin says, you know, I have this thing going on, can you do it? And I just say yes, and then try to figure out, you know, if I can make the calendar work. I don't even really ask the details anymore because I know it's going to be a good thing. And please give my best to Joe as well. Is it Zachey?
Yeah.
Right. I don't think we've had the opportunity to meet or work together. But thank you for moderating. And certainly Andres and Jasneet, former students of mine. Michelle, for whatever reason, decided never to take any of my classes, which does hurt. But you know, we connected through another route. I think literally as she was leaving. And we've stayed in touch ever since. I do remember some of our conversations from Peru, which I just thought was really totally kind of crazy. I'm looking for. I want to read you guys something, which I'm going to find. But excuse me. The first thing I want to mention though is. SIPA Civic evolved from its original name, which was Citizen American Voter. And Andreas is absolutely correct, and is certainly one of the leaders. But the idea came from 4 years ago in my first full semester class, which was in the fall of 2016. And it was with that class that I experienced the election. And the anger and the pain and the anguish from that class. And, you know, some of these names might not ring a bell with you, but, you know, Aaron Cooler and Annie Pope and Damien Fagon and James Archer and a bunch of folks who, most of whom were also in that class. The level of despair and anxiety expressed by the class was, you know, really affected me. And it was in that class, and then the following spring, that I started talking about this need for, you know, a different kind of engagement and involvement. And you all, the students, really took that idea and ran with it and created the initial organization. And then it then kind of transferred into SIPA Civic. And so for me, you know, an organization that was started as a result of the election of Donald Trump has now 4 years later been an active participant in his defeat. And I just have to tell you that there's virtually no better feeling than that, than to see, because I always talk with you all about, you know, seeing the impact of your work, and at the local level, it happens, you know, pretty quickly and pretty significantly, you know, but at the same time, the work is not done. That was an election. Getting elected is different than governing. And so many of your predecessors, I'll say it that way, were questioning at the time whether they should even think about going into government given who the leader was going to be. And I said then that they should, if they had the opportunity, certainly second years who were about to graduate in May of 17, because I want all of you at those tables. I want all of you in those rooms. I want all of you using your previous experience and certainly what you learned at SIPA to help make different decisions. Sometimes stopping bad things from happening, sometimes making good things happen. And so now, 4 years later, and for those who are certainly participating in today's event, please think about going into public service. Vice President Biden, President-elect Biden, Vice President-elect Harris, they're going to need you even more. There's so much work to be done. There's so many things to be fixed. The Vice President got more votes than any person running for president in the history of the United States of America. But Donald Trump did too, but for the Vice President getting more votes. And so we have some challenges here in the United States and around the world in terms of how we communicate, how we talk to folks, do we talk to folks? I want to encourage all of you as students and former students, but students of the world and lifelong learners to enjoy the moment, but there's still more work to be done. And we need you. So I'm going to conclude with that, and I'm going to find this email that I sent to my class because I want you to know.
Thanks so much, Mayor Nutter. And on that point of more work needing to be done, I wanted to ask the panel, one of the positive storylines last week was the record voter turnout that we had. Over 160 million Americans voted in the general election. And I'm curious, as organizers and activists, how encouraging was it to see that voter turnout? And do you think that we'll continue to see these higher levels of civic engagement? Or do you worry that with Trump out of the picture and the attention he attracts, turnout will drop in coming elections? I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I'm certainly worried about it, as indicated. Donald Trump may be one of the best organizers of Democrats in the history of the Democratic Party here in recent times. But as I was trying to allude to, I mean, he's an individual, and there are some ideas, and people talk about Trumpism and all that. But 70 million people is a lot of people, and they're not just suddenly going to change their minds because of President Biden and Vice President Harris. And so, and best we can tell, I mean, Donald Trump's not going anywhere. I mean, I know he talked about going to a foreign country, but he's probably not leaving. And so those ideas and that mindset and that feeling is going to stay out there for a long, long period of time. And so that's why I'm suggesting there's a lot more work to be done. I think other elected officials are going to be still frightened by his tweets, by his followers, and obviously they're certainly not showing, any sense of cooperation so far. I mean, you can't even get the GSA to sign the letter. You got people like Mitch McConnell and Cruz and a bunch of others who know better are playing into all the conspiracy stuff because they don't want to piss him off. And so, it's crazy. So we need to stay on top of it.
So I'll tell you my experience and what I've lived through in this past 2-3 years, and then you guys make your own conclusions. So why am I optimistic about people coming out to vote? First of all, we see the largest number of young people ever getting engaged in an election. So that is incredibly uplifting. And this stuff doesn't happen by accident, right? You need to get down to the ground to work. And Jasneet and Michelle can corroborate this, that when we started at SIPA, we started with like a group of 10 folks in Mayor Nutter's 2017 class. All these folks that were co-founders with me of the group. And from that little meeting, right, like we decided to knock on every classroom and recruit students at SIPA. And I can tell you that we had to demystify this whole concept that people think that getting involved, getting engaged in policy and politics is about some big titles. It has nothing to do with that. It's about talking to your friends, your neighbors, organic conversations with everyone around you about, hey man, what do you think about that policy? Is that okay? Is it okay for people to discriminate based on color? Is it okay for making it harder for people to vote? And if it's not okay, what can we do to fix it? And that's where it all starts. And then I can tell you that the events at SIPA range from registering voters in Harlem on 125th Street all the way to bringing the Brennan Center for Justice with Professor Fuchs and Mayor Nutter and actually touching on the policy and the laws that prevent African Americans and Latinos and minorities all over the country to get to the battle. So we were trying to tackle both things at the same time, right? Like the policy, the academic part of it, and also on the ground. And then when it was time to take action, we sent 3-4 groups to the battleground states in 2018, to Georgia, Texas, Beto's race, Stacey Abrams' race, in Florida, Debbie Murkasel Powell, Donna Shalala, Governor candidate Gillum for governor, et cetera, et cetera. So we did not just stay with the idea in the classroom, right? We took it into action. Over 20 events at SIPA that had, like I said, range from policy to registering voters to everything else. So why do I mention this? Because that same thing that we did at SIPA happened all over the country. Groups like Persist Brooklyn, it's a bunch of neighbors that got together and decided to organize. And right now they're registered as a 501c3, and they're bringing in more money than most other established organizations. And they're having more impact on battleground states by calling, sending notes, emails, sending postcards. And this has had a huge impact. I'm just giving you an example of how this replicated all over the country. Thousands and thousands and thousands of neighbors and friends saying, we cannot allow 4 more years of Donald Trump. And that is the beginning of grassroots organizing. And I have to recognize the TMAC team with Anya Schiffrin, Professor Schiffrin, they partnered with us in 2018. They sent folks that do documentaries, and they followed. You can check out all these things through the SIPA website. They followed us and they took videos of what it's like to knock on doors and engage with voters who did not want to vote for Democrats, who did not care about the issues, who were not even thinking about voting. So that's the beginning. I'm going to pass it on to Michelle and Jasneet so they can expand on that thought.
I can go next. So to your question, Zachey, I think let me talk about it through the context of a couple of voter conversations that I remember from this past week. There was one voter I spoke with who is a mother of 2 children. One of the kids has something called SCID. It's a severe combined immunodeficiency, bubble boy syndrome. One of her sons has. And she told me that part of the reason why she was interested in picking up the phone and calling her strangers in Philadelphia, where she lived, was because of Donald Trump's and the Republican Party's insistence on trying to take away the ACA. Prior to the ACA, she paid $4,000 out of pocket for her son's condition. And post ACA, that was down to $400 per month. And she knew that President-elect Biden, which is wonderful to say still, would work to protect that. That's one type of voter I spoke with. Another, a volunteer on our team is African-American and was speaking to some voters in Minnesota randomly on Tuesday afternoon, because we were worried about turnout then there. And he was called the N-word as he was phone banking 2 times during a 2-hour phone banking shift. And when I debriefed with him afterwards, checked in to see if he was doing okay, he was clear-eyed and said, these are the stakes of the election. This is what Donald Trump has awakened in people, and that is what we have to beat back. I mentioned those 2 stories because it's one voter who is motivated by the, positive vision of President-elect Biden, and another voter that is inspired negatively by the hate that Donald Trump has unleashed. I worry about those second types of voters and whether we will be able to continue to rally them once Donald Trump is not on the ticket. I think that is going to be the struggle that we have to continue to push on, making sure those folks stay engaged even when Trump is not on the ballot.
Yes, well, I definitely echo Jasneet and Andres' words and Mayor Nutter's as well on the fact that, yeah, 70 million people is not a repudiating difference. And that, I think that was one of the shocking moments at the beginning of the election, of election night that turned into election week, that a lot of people were waiting a repudiating difference. That was the expectation. So when that didn't happen, that started to feel like, where are we living? I mean, after everything we have seen, there's still 70 plus people that support the sitting president. So I think the country is aware now that Trumpism has a wide base, and the only reason why that big red wave did not seize the election and did not win the election is because it was met by a gigantic blue tsunami. And so that this I think everybody knows that in order for this to sustain, we need to continue organizing. So basically the story of this election is a story of sustained organizing, which started literally the first day that Trump won the election. The day after, people were like, what do we do? Our lives are in danger. Dreamers, Muslims, Black, brown community, Latinos. So I think we're all aware of that. Then the other thing I would say is that things that have motivated me, and I think really that this momentum, this sustained organizing momentum will further on, is that people are already phone banking in Georgia, virtually in Georgia. They are already fighting to win the Senate. And that was literally the day after the election. How do we do? Like, there are people like Andrew Yang moving to Georgia, but we don't need to talk about these surrogates. There are actually people like us and Persist Brooklyn and other volunteer organizations outside of Georgia that are moving to Georgia basically to continue to do this work, because we know this is not only about President-elect Biden. Sorry, also adjusting here. But it is about what are the issues at stake. So we have avoided the highest risk. Now, what are the other issues at stake? Climate change, systemic racism, all this prosecution against Latino communities, ICE, and all this institutional architecture that has been built around Trumpism. So I think this definitely gives me hope that that people know what is at stake, and that we will need to continue fighting, and that we're here for the long haul.
Yeah, I think that I know we want to talk about the campaign trail, and we all at some point ended up on different campaigns. But I want to agree with Michelle's last point that getting and staying actively involved is critical. And there's a note in either the chat or the Q&A asking about, well, Congress lost, House Democrats lost some seats, may or may not, depending on Georgia, get to 50, let alone, technically, in an effort to take over the Senate with the vice president, of course, presiding officer. Again, we should celebrate, some victories here and there and all that, but, it wasn't, on the other hand, and we have to be careful as Democrats because we often downplay, our successes. We and I think Michelle said this earlier, or one of you, we did take out an incumbent president. It hasn't happened in 28 years. Not easy. We did elect the first Black, Asian woman vice president in the history of the country. And I'm sure, we lost some seats that we didn't want to. We probably picked up some seats that maybe didn't expect, or, all of that. So, it ebbs and flows. And again, if we had a whole lot of young people vote, and I don't know what the exact number is, maybe you guys do, how do we keep them? Because here's the thing. A lot of people came out to vote for Barack Obama in 2008, right? First Black president. Oh, let's get excited, right? You're not always going to break new ground in every election, and every election matters. Who runs for city council matters. Who runs for mayor matters. State rep, general assembly, whatever it is, governor, members of the House and the Senate and the president and county commissioner and school board, and right? All of these elections matter. And they're not always going to be the most exciting, dynamic things in the world. You're not always going to make history. But there's never been an election where someone didn't win. And people win for one of two reasons. Either they got their voters out or other people stayed home. And so then you get what you get, right? You either got your person or you got someone else's because you didn't participate. So if you want change, you actually have to be a part of it. This is a republic, it's a democratic republic. It's a participatory form of government. You have to be engaged and involved if you want to make change. So, you know, I think some people probably know by now. So I was very, very active on the Mike Bloomberg campaign. Back from the fall of 2019, I was on the road probably 5-6 days a week. Although at the beginning of the school year, I did still have my class at 11 o'clock on Wednesdays, and worked around that. I would often leave campus literally right after class ended and go out to one of the airports. A couple times I flew in on Wednesday morning from somewhere on a red eye, but I got to be in class, and it was an incredible experience. Working with Mike, who people have been in my class known for a long time, and I know the vice president. I wasn't against the vice president. It was just kind of where I was, and a lot of relationship and all that. But it was certainly a lot of fun out there, and then it all stopped. It just all stopped, right? And everybody made the adjustments, but people were hungry for change. We had 25 people at one point in time, Democrats, trying to become president of the United States of America. There was something for everybody, right? And but I think it was Andreas said earlier, the way it all came together, Super Tuesday, that ended, certainly Mike Bloomberg's campaign and a number of others the following week, that the second Super Tuesday. And then there was, Vice President Biden, Senator Sanders, and then about another week or two, and then that was over. And then it was done. And so I think we've also learned from 2016, we can't have these endless fights among Democrats trying to unify the party and put our candidate in the best possible position. But if you haven't worked, there's nothing like a presidential race. Now, our folks who are on, you're going to have a big race next year if you're in New York, of course, mayor's race. But if you ever have the opportunity to work on a presidential campaign, volunteer or as staff, take advantage of it. There's just nothing like it. And if you get to travel, that's even better.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor Nutter. And Andres, I want to give you a chance to debrief your experience on the campaign trail in Florida. You mentioned you had some data, and maybe if you can just highlight any challenges that you experienced. And I also want to be mindful of time. We have some questions in the chat, and I want to leave 10 minutes at the end to get to those. But go ahead, Andres.
Thank you, Zachey. 2 points in 2 minutes. The first one, I have to emphasize the importance of mentorship and the advice that we got from Mayor Nutter, Professor Fuchs, Anya Schiffrin. Without that trust, right? When I would come to them and say, we need X, Y, and Z, they didn't give me any trouble. They said, how much? Here's a check, right? Let's do it. What are we waiting for? And that is so important, especially for us people of color, right? 14 years ago, me no speak English, right? Like you don't feel like you're part of this fabric of democracy. And when you have mentors like them that empower you to do this work, all of a sudden everything becomes meaningful, every conversation. So that's the first point I want to make. And the second point I want to make, when we were talking about organizing in Florida, I never got the chance to be on staff. I got the chance to be a surrogate through my friend Josh Dixon. And I got the opportunity, right, to be in panels with Dr. Jill Biden, with Pete Buttigieg. And again, to get people of faith in Florida excited about the idea that their moral values do not have to be at odds with their vote, right? That it's okay to be a Democrat and be a Christian, for example, or profess the Jewish faith or the Muslim faith, right? That was very important for us. And when I look at the data now, almost 10 million voters, Zachey, went out and voted people of faith in these very important states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. And that shows you the importance of that work, because like Mayor Nutter said, not everyone feels or thinks the same. I mean, we may be very progressive, right? But America is a very wide range of voters and feelings and ideologies. And we need to be very aware of that as we attempt to heal the nation in this next 4 years. And then on the issue of Osceola County and Orange County, which were the counties that we worked in the campaign in Florida, this didn't happen by chance. All of these friends, Giovanni Pagan, Michelle Meza, Jasneet, and many others from SIPA, from the civic group where we have our WhatsApp group, they're like, how can we get involved? How do I get plugged in? I had a friend, Julia, Andres, I want to get involved. Where do I go? And I'm like, it's not just a presidential. You want to have real impact? Go to the school board race in Miami-Dade, District 9. And Luisa Santos, who was under by 50 points against a 24-year incumbent, won her race thanks to a SIPA student that came out of SIPA ready to work. So those are like little examples, right, of how we have an impact there. And then when it comes to Florida, in Central Florida, we realized that we had problems. Okay, let's not kid ourselves. We had issues in Miami-Dade, right? Our people in Miami-Dade were bombarded by disinformation, which is the work that I do on my day job, right? To study this, consult for the State Department and Global Americans. And it's a lethal weapon. It's a weapon of war, disinformation. But at the same time, we couldn't just sit there with our arms crossed. I'm not going to talk about what the party does and the state party does. There are many things that we can fix, many, many things that we need to restructure. But the important thing is about the young people, like Gio, Puerto Rican Americans, folks that got involved, organized everyone from SIPA, everyone that we knew in our circle of friends and family. And we said, let's do this. And we made over 60,000 calls, just so you get an idea. Osceola County in 2016 went for Hillary with 85,000 votes. In 2020, it went for Biden with 97,000 votes. And even though Trump also increased, it is important to note how much we did, right? Without this organizing work, we wouldn't have been able to do it. On that same token, Orange County with Hillary was 329,000 votes, and with Biden, 394,000 votes, just to get an idea, a huge increase in engagement. And you can also give credit to the folks from Parkland, right, that registered hundreds of thousands of teenagers that turned 18 at that time to vote. It's huge. It has an impact. Same with the work that Stacey Abrams did in Georgia, registering people to vote, getting them ready, having a plan to vote was so important to take these numbers out. And in Miami-Dade, just so you get an idea, it's not all negative, right? We have the first female mayor elected for the county of Miami-Dade, and that is huge. And that didn't happen by mistake either. All these folks had a canvassing program. Commissioner Higgins, Miami Beach, all the Republican areas of Miami Beach, she won. You know why? Because they knocked on doors. And of course, there's pandemic times and it's difficult and people have to make decisions in different campaigns. But I will tell you this, it definitely hurt us not being able to knock on doors in many areas. And Mayor Nutter will corroborate this. And then I'll finish with this. In the last minute, the last weekend, we had a need to take folks out to vote in Philadelphia, which everyone knows now that was a deciding city to bring the vote for Joe Biden. And just having that relationship of trust. I called Mayor Nutter, my friends from the Biden campaign said, we need to get the African-American churches to get out the vote. Who do we know in Philly? And I'm like, I have Mayor Nutter here. And I contacted Mayor Nutter and I said, Mayor Nutter, what can we do? Do you have contacts with African-American pastors? Can we get the vote out in this last weekend? And he delivered. And now you see, right, how Philly came through for the country as well in that way.
Yeah, thanks so much, Andres. And Michelle, you were working with the Wisconsin Democratic Party in the home stretch of the campaign. And obviously we know that's a state that Biden was able to flip this year, winning by about 20,000 votes. So can you talk to the audience about your experience speaking to voters in that state and how gratifying it was for Biden to come up on top?
Yeah, sure. Well, the last part of the campaign in Wisconsin was really tough. The Wisconsin Democratic Party has been organizing for years, not months, for years. So there was a whole infrastructure mounted and built around this election, but that certainly looks to further on after this election for the coming races. And Wisconsin was a tricky state because it had been lost by Hillary Clinton by just a razor-thin margin of 20,000 votes. And despite all these poll data saying, you know, Wisconsin is, Democrats are 17 points ahead Republicans. We will also be told by our party chair, Ben Wickler, you know, we have to fight and we have to continue working as if we were losing by double digits. So literally poll data, and I don't know why, and I think this is a burning question and it's something to be figured out for, you know, the future, which is why is the polling so off in Wisconsin and in Michigan that has very similar demographics and context was more accurate. But so this was one of the things, the poll data just saying, you know, you are way ahead and we just not listening to it and continue running. Then being in a state that was hardly hit by coronavirus was the other fact. People were tired, people were exhausted, people didn't want to get more calls. And, you know, I had volunteers literally saying, I have one of them, I have my wife in the hospital because of COVID for 2 months. Can you call me late? Can you call me next week? Can you call me next Thursday? Can you call me next Friday? And I would just say, you know, should I call this person or just let him, you know, be and address his family situation? But you know, he would be really interested in getting engaged. So at the end I called, and in one of the last weeks he said, you know, I can do this. And the other thing, which was really hard, you know, warming and breaking, and the other thing was you know, just by the end of the campaign as well, and throughout the campaign, certainly all these technological challenges that we had, because we had people from, you know, of 80 years that really wanted to help and that they normally engage in the elections, and they would get really frustrated about, you know, logging in. How do you manage to have somebody, and 70 plus, 80 plus year old person, just to manage an account in a speed dialer? I mean, these were really challenging things, but I can tell you, we did this with them. I was in the phone with like 75, 80 plus year old senior, you know, saying, okay, you need to do this, like literally guiding them through the phone, and they would not give up. And despite frustration, we would always say we are in this together. So I think this was, although challenging, at the end it was really rewarding to see how we managed to overcome all these situations, on top, of course, of coronavirus, voter suppression, voter depression as well, the long lines, all these Proud Boys, you know, menacing messages saying, we know where you live. And the last thing I would say that was like a really, really, I don't know, it's just heartwarming to say that it was Jacob Blake's family organizing in Kenosha. You know, this Black man, unarmed, that received 7 shots in the back, having the family, just as Stacey Abrams in Georgia, you know, Milwaukee had a very big high turnout of Black communities going out and organizing and voting just to, you know, express their indignation about all this. So all this indignation has led to actions in the polls. And that's why President-elect Joe Biden said in his victory speech, you know, I owe the Black communities. I owe them, because he knows that in cities like Milwaukee, like Detroit, like Atlanta, Black communities are the ones who have delivered for him the victory. I would end up there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michelle. And there were so many powerful stories this cycle, and I wish we had time to talk more about them. We have about 7 minutes left, and we have 4 questions from in the chat. So I'm hoping we can get to all of them. Luisa asks, does the panel have any tips about how to get internships in the public sector, and specifically get involved with community organizing? And whoever wants to take that one, please feel free.
I mean, I think the first thing is trying to even figure out, you know, what those opportunities are. I mean, the first part of this year, all of this year, I mean, so many things were canceled, you know, because of COVID-19 and, you know, people working from home, et cetera, et cetera. But there are opportunities. And so I would encourage all of you you know, in this way. I mean, really kind of act like COVID is not going on. Reach out to whomever you were thinking about reaching out. You know, the worst that can happen is they say they don't have a program or they cut it back or whatever the case may be. But I always encourage my students and others who come to me, you know, you just want to get on the radar screen. You want somebody to have your piece of paper, but like you exist, you're alive. Here's some talent and skill. You know, everything doesn't get posted. All the jobs are not in the New York Times. You just never know when something is going to pop up. And they say, oh, let me check on that resume I got a couple weeks back. The person seemed like they might, you know, have the skill set that we're looking for. So I just wouldn't make any assumptions that, you know, everything is dire. May not be, you know, happy days are here again, but I mean, somewhere in between is, you know, things still have to get done. People leave, folks are leaving government, retiring, want to do something different, whatever the case may be, won the lottery, whatever, right? And so just keep plugging away.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Nutter. And you actually mentioned earlier this highly partisan environment that we are in. And Ray asked, how can we reach out to folks across the aisle in this highly partisan environment? How can the Biden administration govern in this current environment that we're in?
Well, I'd love everyone else to jump in, but the one thing I have been expressing some concern about. So, you know, look, it's been mentioned more than a few times. You know, we've got something for everybody in the Democratic Party, and you know, we love nothing more than arguing amongst ourselves about whatever. The president-elect, vice president-elect, you know, I mean, if you want to reach across the aisle, you have to reach across the aisle. And they will try, and it's in both of their nature. I think we need to have an honest conversation with the broad spectrum of Democrats who have, you know, high expectations about everything. That's fine. I love high expectations, but you know, also expect to win everything and get everything, and that's just not realistic, right? So, a couple of weeks back, there was some speculation, and then the story kind of went away, that you know, in an effort to reach across the aisle, the vice president might, you know, have some Republicans in his cabinet. And, you know, some members of the Democratic Party, I mean, you know, it was like heresy. I mean, people lost their minds. You know, President Obama had Ray LaHood, who's the Secretary of Transportation. And but for the fact that I knew from just like some knowledge or information or whatever that he technically was a Republican, he could not have been more supportive. He could not have been, right? I mean, like he knew his business and could talk to Republicans. And so sometimes you have to do these things. Those are the tangible, visible signs. It's not just what you say, it's what you do, right? So if they at least can see a friend over there, you know, it's harder for people to beat you up if, you know, if they've gotten to know you or if they know your friends, right? I mean, they kind of moderate themselves a little bit. So, you know, I think he will do that or want to do that. And we have to be mature enough to say, oh, okay, all right, I get that. I understand that, right? It's not just a battle in front of you. It's like, you know, 2 years down the road. So anyway, I've talked too long.
No, thanks so much, Mayor Nutter. And last quick question from Sean, and I'll pose this to you, Jasneet, because you have a background in communications and messaging. Why do you think the Democrats didn't make gains in Congress and the Senate? Do you think it's a messaging issue with the Democrats not being able to reach out to working class citizens in the US?
Well, would also love if we had time to speak to both Andres, actually everyone on this, because I'm sure we're going to come in with 4 different perspectives on this. My thought was it goes back to what Mayor Nutter was just talking about of us infighting. I think we just have to realize different messages work in different districts. And if someone, you know, Abigail Spanberger, if defund is not playing in her district, we should respect that and maybe not speak as much about it. I think it's just a matter of being strategic with who we're communicating to.
Yeah, absolutely. And wish, again, we had more time to discuss some of these issues. I want to thank all of the... and Mayor Nutter for sharing your insights about the campaign. And really thank you guys for all the hard work that you've done. Thank you, Professor Schiffrin, for organizing this panel. And thank you to everyone on the call who voted and did their part in this election. So let's keep this important work going and look forward to future discussions. So thanks so much, everyone.
Jackie, hold on for 1 second. I don't think the dean is going to shut us down. But I wanted to, again, we should give a big round of applause to Professor Schiffrin and all of you who participated. I do want to share this message with you all because I think it's pertinent not only to 2016 but to beyond. So I guess the election got called on Saturday. I sent this note to my class from 2016 in the fall. To all of you in my first full semester class, my soul was seared with the emotion, fear, and anxiety of that day in our class after Election Day, November 2016. I have never forgotten that day, and every day since I have thought of that day and those moments with all of you. The hurt, the raw emotion, and your expressions of that day. I will share with you now that I have used the passion and emotion of that day with all of you as the fuel for my fire to defeat Donald Trump going toward 2020. You all inspired me and reminded me of the need to stay engaged, even though I literally just left office and politics to some extent. You all relit that fire of service within me, and it burned and burned and burned through November 2020 until this new goal was accomplished. Thank you all for keeping my flame of faith and hope alive. No matter where you are or what you are doing, please know that you played a significant role in reaffirming principles of democracy, freedom, and decency in America. But also know that you made me better and more focused about what needed to be done and that I had more to give. To my SIPA Fall 2016 class, thank you. Job well done. Please be safe and well.
You have really summed up what that was like in 2016, Mayor. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
It's like this spring, we're all bonded and we will never forget each other because of the things that
it's
we
a different kind of
together in our
experience. It
community.
really is. And I'm very much attached to them. We closed the door. We had raw personal conversations. People were crying. People were questioning, why am I in a public policy school? This doesn't matter. Facts don't matter. Knowledge doesn't matter. Why am I even doing this? And it was a painful experience. My class is at 11 o'clock on Wednesdays. And so for a lot of students, it was their first class the day after the election. I was at the Javits Center the night before, my wife and daughter and I. I mean, it was just incredible. And Professor, we had every day that week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we had open sessions, open forums for students just to be able to talk and express themselves. I had a guy, I think it was that Wednesday night, came up to me and said, I was planning to go see my mom in Pakistan for the holidays. He said, I'm afraid I won't be able to get back in the country. And I said to him, Barack Obama is still president of the United States of America. Go see your mom. Just get back before January 20th. And he kind of looked at me and he smiled and he said, oh, okay, I feel better. I mean, it's personal and we have to take it seriously.
Yeah.
Right?
I'll break in and say I had a panel that week with a lot of people from Washington, and every one of them canceled because they were too scared to come and speak.
Right.
They were from all different administrations. And I said to the students, we have no panelists. And they said, we're meeting anyway.
Right.
And rustled up exactly what you're talking about, rustled up a panel of journalists to talk about the elections because we couldn't get any civil servants in the room.
Yeah.
And then everybody afterwards said, okay, now we're going out for dinner. It was exactly what you're talking about, people coming in and crying. And that's part of what was so hard about the COVID this time.
Yeah.
Was we needed to be together.
Yes.
And we actually couldn't be.
Yeah, but we will be.
Yeah, we will. We definitely will.
I love you
Anyway,
guys.
thank you for sharing your experiences of that.
Yeah.
I'd like you, 2016 is seared
Yeah.
in
Yeah,
my
never
brain.
forget it.
I'm so glad you wrote that
Definitely.
letter.
Yeah.
And thank you all for coming back.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for Zachey, the first year.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
really, really
These-
beautiful to see everybody.
These veterans, these graduates, you know,
Yeah.
all big and bad, got all these big jobs and doing all these things. You know, we're very proud of you all. Very
We
proud.
sure are. We really are. It's what gives
See you
meaning
later.
to our work. Thank
All
you
right.
so much.
Thank
See you
you
soon.
very much.
All right.
Thank
See
you.
you later. Bye-bye.